okay, as an FSU guy and Florida State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina, obviously with how coveted they would be in the realignment game, different kind of perspective that you're going to have on Jim Phillips and everything that's happening with the conference than everybody else in the ACC with this whole playoff debate, right? 5+11 versus 4-4-2-2. How do you, from a Florida State perspective, like what is the thought and feeling from Florida State, Clemson, Miami, et cetera, on what is the better option for the playoff for right now? Because I know everybody's sights are really set on like 2030 and what happens when we blow this popsicle stand and get out of here. But for now, you are in the ACC. So what is the perspective there or thought from most that are following, covering, et cetera, involved with those schools right now on which playoff path is better?
Yeah, I think if you're Clemson, you don't care because they're by and far the best, the cream of the crop, right? Like they are the team that it doesn't matter. They're getting the one auto bid most years over the next 5 anyway. I don't think they care. When it comes to Florida State, Miami, I think that you probably are fine either way too. Like if you're taking care of your business and you go 10-2 as Florida State or Miami, you're probably getting in more often than not, whether it's because those brands are so large. So, I hate to give a politician's answer, but I don't think those programs really it moves the needle one way or the other. Similar to if you asked an Alabama, right? If Alabama goes 10-2, it doesn't matter if we have a 4-4-2-2 or a 5-11. Alabama's getting in. Same with Texas and Ohio State and Penn State and Oregon and all these programs. But if you ask a Louisville or you ask a Syracuse or something like that, my thought would be that they would, the smaller brands in the ACC, I think that from a team-to-team perspective, they would probably prefer the 4-4-2-2 because it's just a more guaranteed. Like you make the ACC championship game, you're probably getting in. And to me, that's more attainable than a Louisville getting voted in. When it comes to, are they going to put a 10-2 Louisville in over a 9-3 LSU, right? Probably going to go take the 9-3 LSU or the 9-3 Nebraska or whatever this really large brand might be out there in one of the big two conferences. So from a team to team, I would probably say they lean more towards 4-4-2-2. We talked about this on my channel and you brought it up, and I'll echo it. From a league perspective, I don't know that you can admit that you're half the other conferences. And so league perspective, certainly the 5-11, team to team, I think if you had to poll most coaches, they would say, my chances of getting to the playoff as a Georgia Tech or as a Louisville or a Virginia Tech are probably slightly higher with the 4-4-2-2 model.
Yeah, where do you stand personally on it?
I'm pretty split. I think both options stink. And, I'd like to go back to two teams in a national championship game and bring back the meaning of bowl season. Personally, I think a little bit more small picture, right? And I don't think as big picture because with my perspective of thinking Florida State's probably going to be out of this mess in 4 to 5 years anyway, I don't really care about the big picture ramifications. Yeah. I also, because of revenue sharing in Florida in the ACC right now that is introduced with the lawsuit settlement, I think it would be better for Florida State to have the 4-4-2-2 model. I think that you want to guarantee more spots for your conference so that your conference makes more money. And if the conference makes more money, Florida State makes more money with the settlement. So that's a really specific want. An SMU fan might argue, a North Carolina fan might argue, although their thoughts might be closer to Florida State too because of their brand. But in the short term, which I think is how a Florida State fan has to think, they're not thinking about what's best for the conference in 2036 or whatever. I think the 4-4-2-2 model is probably a little bit better because maybe we're a little jaded because of what happened in 23, but I don't trust the committee to do what's right. And so just give me the guaranteed spots. There's nothing saying that a third ACC team couldn't get in if Florida State goes 11-1 and Clemson goes 11-1 and Miami goes 11-1. There's a great chance that all three would get in and get one of those three would get an at-large bid in the 4-4-2-2 model. So I think for FSU, for their specific scenario, you'd probably take the guarantee at this point because ultimately more money for the ACC is more money for FSU.
Okay, so you mentioned 4 or 5 years probably getting out. I looked at what happened with the ACC settlement with Florida State and Clemson and thought these guys made out like gangbusters. You're probably, yes, going to be out. It kind of set a timer on the conference. And then you're getting a lot more money if you perform on the field, but even if you just perform in terms of how many people are watching your games, which is obviously going to be very advantageous to Florida State, Clemson, Miami. So how has your perspective changed on, I guess, like where the conference is at? And when you say like 4 to 5 years, like, give me what do you think is the most likely scenario? Maybe that's the best way to ask this. What's the most likely scenario for the Florida State, Clemson, whoever else it's going to be exit from the ACC now post settlement?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this so much. I think if it was today, I do really think it would be the Big Ten. I don't think that they're getting out today. I don't think that an announcement comes in the next, few hours or weeks or anything like that. I kind of lean Big Ten at this moment. But a large part of me thinks that when we get closer to that deadline, that ESPN is not going to want to lose the FSU logo and that they're not going to want to lose that entity, that property that they are making money on. And I think that ESPN would look and will look like Florida State plays Alabama the next 2 years. They play Georgia the next 2 years after that, if those games end up happening, because we, with scheduling and we talk about,
right,
what may happen, what may get canceled. I think when you look at the ratings for LSU, Florida State a couple of years ago, I think when you look at some of that stuff, you look at the rivalry with UF, I think ESPN would rather keep that in-house and play defense more. So I really am split. I think that, Fox wants Florida State. I think the Big Ten would be a fit. But I also, a large part of me thinks that the SEC, ESPN would not want to lose that entity as well. So I don't know, maybe I'm like 55-45 Big Ten, but with no confidence at all, just because I could truly see it going either way. Most likely scenario, I still think that 2030 timeframe is around the most likely. Now, could it happen a year or two before that, so that one of those conferences is negotiating with their TV partner with Florida State, Clemson, Miami, UNC in the fold? I definitely think that's possible. I don't think that it's a hard line stop of it's 2030 or bust. It's only $18 million a year more to exit a year earlier. Not that $18 million is a small amount of money by any means, but certainly not, if you had a way to get out and it cost you $18 million extra, would you take it? Probably. So I do think that, it's equally as likely that Florida State gets out by 2030 as 2030. So maybe I'll call that 50-50. But it would floor me if it was 2031 and Florida State was playing an ACC schedule.
Last question. What do you think happens to the rest of the ACC then at that point? Is the conference going to continue on in some form or fashion now that they've kind of front loaded with more teams?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they'll, you look at the teams that I think would have like pretty guaranteed landing spots. I think that Florida State, Clemson, probably North Carolina. I listen, I like to bag on them and stuff, but I think Miami would probably get somewhere and maybe be a travel partner with Florida State to the Big Ten to keep that rivalry intact. They feel like a Big Ten, small private university anyway. I think there's a chance that you could lose a couple of more, but I don't think anyone else is like guaranteed a landing spot at that moment. Now, could the Big 12 try and pick some teams off like a Louisville or NC State or Virginia Tech? I mean, absolutely. Like I think Georgia Tech, I think all of that is possible and exists. But I also, if you're Louisville and those top, or SMU, one of those teams, and one of those top teams leave, well, what's that do for you? You're now in a conference that is offered to give. Could the Big 12 really pull them? Because who's getting the best ratings if those top 4 or 5 teams that I mentioned leave? It's going to be the Louisvilles. It's going to be the Georgia Techs. And you've got a pretty lucrative deal still, where ESPN's still paying the ACC a pretty good amount of money. And you can now earn more by being in this conference, not only by performing on the field, but performing on television, as you said, without having to compete with an FSU and a Clemson and a Miami and a North Carolina for both on field accolades and TV share. So I part of me thinks that the Big 12 could pull some people, but they'd have to make that a pretty sweet deal for a Louisville to jump, because Louisville's going to do great ratings with it's all percentage based. They don't have to hit Florida State's numbers. They just have to be in the top 3. Georgia Tech could do incredible ratings if Brent Key has really built that up there. So I think the likelihood of another conference pulling them right away, just because Florida State and Clemson and others leave, is diminished now, and actually puts the ACC on a little bit more stable ground because of the revenue incentives of the conference. Now, by that point, has the Big 12 renegotiated something similar, and then Louisville has the same opportunity there? Yeah, they do, but Is Louisville going to make more money on TV in the ACC or the Big 12? I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that is going to make it tougher for other programs to want to leave for a reduced share or anything like that when they can make more money in the ACC. So I do all that to say I think the ACC is actually in a little bit more stable place, even though I think they're going to lose their top brands. I think the revenue share that they've come up with, it will lock some other teams in and keep them from going. And then you get down to the next tier of Boston College and Syracuse and Wake Forest and others. I mean, they weren't going to go anywhere anyway. So I actually think they're kind of stable right now. And maybe they'll bring in a Tulane, Memphis, USF, things like that to just help build the numbers back up. But I actually think the ACC's in a somewhat stable position post 2030.
That's a really interesting point. I had not thought about that yet, but how much that deal has changed and how much that can still benefit whoever slides up the pecking order. So yeah, good stuff. All right, TJ, where can people find not only obviously College Football Addiction, but all the FSU work?
Yeah, College Football Addiction here on YouTube. I do an FSU only show called Double Fries No Slaw. You can find it anywhere as well. And then on Twitter, it's just my name, TJ_Pittinger, for I don't know, hot takes and SEC slander if you're into that.
Hey, man, banger tweet the other day about the Texas and the SEC.
The Big 12 fans seem to enjoy it. So
Take care, TJ. We'll see you, man.
Thanks, bud.